Why don't we tell the people about more bipartisanship, Krystal?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great segue. A bipartisan pro-war caucus here in D.C. is making the world worse, part 1323. Here's the very latest with regards to Ukraine, and then I'll get to the specific moves that Democrats and Republicans are making right now. Let's go ahead and throw this New York Times tear sheet that we have here up on the screen. So you'll recall, Putin put out, here's my list of demands. I don't want, and the biggest one being, I don't want NATO to expand to Ukraine, and I want a promise that that is not ultimately going to happen. And he was pushing, hey, I need you guys to actually respond in writing to what my request was. So the U.S. did deliver their written response to Russia's demands with regard to Eastern Europe. And those, that written response is not public, which frankly, I think it should be. I always think transparency is good in this regards. But what Tony Blinken, Secretary of State, is saying publicly is that effectively they didn't give really an inch, that everything they put in there was, things that they had already said with regards to Russia. Here's some of the reporting. They say the document suggests reciprocal transparency measures regarding force posture in Ukraine, as well as measures to increase confidence regarding military exercises and maneuvers in Europe. The Biden administration has already made such proposals, so unclear whether the U.S. response will have any effect on the growing crisis over Russia's massive troop buildup along Ukraine's borders. Blinken going further and saying it reiterates publicly what we've said for many weeks. This morning, the latest from Russia is they have not seen the answers yet, but they are very pessimistic that is going to address any of their concerns. So ultimately, none of this moves the ball forward in any way significantly at all. At the same time, Democrats, partnering with Republicans, are helping to make everything worse, make the possibility for diplomacy much less likely. Let's put this next tear sheet up on the screen from The Intercept. Sarah Sirota doing the reporting here, saying Democrats are rushing through a massive Ukraine defense bill. The House of Representatives, spearheaded, of course, by Nancy Pelosi, is looking to skip markup and hold a floor vote on this package as soon as next week. Here's the details. This legislation would send $500 million from the Foreign Military Financing Program to Ukraine for 2022. That would make Ukraine the third largest recipient of such funding from this account, surpassed only by Israel and Egypt. So that's the level of military funding that they are pushing to send to Ukraine. Of course, Republicans have their own bad ideas with this regard. Theirs would only give Ukraine $450 million versus the $500 million, but it's worse in a significant respect, which is it would also impose sanctions related to that Nord Stream 2 pipeline project. So what this does is it just makes it much more difficult for diplomacy to actually happen. It sort of binds the administration's hands. It sends this very aggressive, hawkish signal towards Russia and is one more piece inching us up towards having an actual conflict here. And the other thing I would say is that, how many of these Democrats and Republicans have been running around, we don't have enough money, how will we pay for it? Oh, the inflation, et cetera, et cetera. When it comes to something like this, suddenly money's not a problem.
I was going to say, but how will we pay for it? There's like that meme of when you do capitals, but how will we pay for it? I mean, that's basically how I feel here. The Mitch McConnell element of this is also excellent.
Yeah,
go ahead and put that on the screen from Mitch. Mitch is praising the Biden move as encouraging after the Pentagon says it could put more than 8,500 troops on alert. So look, don't let anybody ever tell you that bipartisanship in Washington is dead. Every time you hear them complain about it, it's not true, especially whenever it comes to foreign policy. It's on bettering all of our lives where they all seem to disagree, and disagree just enough that they're not able to ever actually do anything. I think that the important element to all of this is, what do the actual Ukrainians say? Put that on the screen. From the actual Ukrainians, Ukraine's NSC National Security Advisor Secretary Danilov tells the BBC he does not expect an imminent invasion and does not share the, quote, panic which he connects to, quote, geopolitical and domestic processes in the West. Quote, the buildup of Russian troops isn't as rapid as some claim. You know, this is the part where I just feel like I feel terrible for them. They are being used as pawns in a great game.
Yeah.
You know, people here in DC, Alexander Vindman and all these other neocons, they are not acting in a way that the Ukrainians want them to act. And same, I mean, the Russians obviously, you know, causing some of this crisis, and then we with NATO, and then our rhetoric ramping up, the US Congress shipping aid over there. Do the Ukrainians even want it? Has anybody asked them? They're like, hey, what's going on? It turns out it's a complicated situation. Turns out also they find the rhetoric, the alarmist rhetoric from Moscow and Washington to not match the actual situation, period. That is the part which actually drives me completely nuts, which is, you know, lack of regional understanding of the dynamics, both in our past either promises, guarantees, whatever you want to call it, around NATO, the history also of Ukraine itself over the last 10 years has been a complete mess, obviously, with the civil war and the Donbass, and then our own efforts in order to arm the Ukrainian military or not. Big debates, neither of that worked, by the way.
Yeah.
Same in terms of Moscow, a lot of their gambles on how this was all going to play out didn't exactly work out as well. The lack of holistic perspective is creating a massive moral panic here in Washington, which the actual Ukrainians are telling us does not exist. And they are telling us that it's not helpful, Krystal. I mean, why can't we listen to them? If this was another country, you know, let's take other examples that had been invaded and stuff in the past. They are almost always the ones who are warning the loudest, saying, hey, please come, we need aid, we need help. They're telling you explicitly, stop. What you're doing is actually making the situation much worse. It's terrible because they really are being used like pawns.
And then you can tell how much propaganda you're being fed by the U.S. news media by the fact that no one
don't show you that. Yeah, that's from BBC Ukraine. You had to find it and translate it.
I found it on Twitter.
Yeah.
And I was like, how could, I mean, you know, this shows how naive I just continue to be. Like, this comment can't be real because I'm not seeing it anywhere else.
Yes.
But I look, this is a real BBC journalist for Russia. So no, it's a real statement. They really said this. And it also tracks with the fact that when we pulled out our diplomats' families, along with, you know, pressuring like UK and Australia, and I think one other, Germany was it that did it?
Germany.
They were like, stop doing this. This isn't helpful. Like, this is alarmist. You're freaking out. And it's actually making the situation worse, and trying to emphasize that, hey, we've got all of these different diplomatic missions, over 100 here in Ukraine, and only these 4 are doing this. So just keep in mind that what the overall picture looks like is different from what you're getting right now from the U.S. news media. And I think that is extraordinarily important. The other thing I want to say here is there's starting to set in this like culture war, brain rot too, because Tucker Carlson, who I have all kinds of issues with, guys, has been more right on this issue than almost anyone else in mainstream press. And listen, I haven't listened to all of his commentary, so I do not want to co-sign all of the things that he's been saying. But what I have seen, he has tried to lay out, hey, this is maybe the Russian perspective here. And hey, this is probably why it's not worth us sending our men and women to potentially fight and die over Ukraine's borders. I saw a piece in Axios this morning where they were lamenting how many Republican candidates, and in particular candidates in primaries, were picking up on Tucker's rhetoric. And they're saying, oh, this is so terrible that they're now echoing the fact that we don't want to go to war. That's what they are lamenting. That's what he's getting called, like a traitor and all these insanity, because he doesn't want us to go to war. Again, I have lots of issues with this man that I have laid out plenty in the past, but it is a sad state of affairs that on this particular issue, he's as close as it comes in the mainstream media to actually having a decent take. But because it's him, then there becomes this other sort of counterbalancing weight on the
Russian
Democratic side of, oh no, we've got to be hawkish with regards to Russia. It's Russiagate all over again with this stuff. And it just drives me completely insane. And that's how you end up with a bill like this one that The Intercept reported on, potentially being sped through Congress with no markup, vote as soon as next week.
You know, Krystal, it also just tells you, outside of the Tucker element, how full of it some of these people are. They are always waxing on about the transatlantic alliance and the continental European and the connection with the United States. Ask the Europeans. Ask Berlin. Berlin doesn't want to go to war.
Yeah.
Berlin, for their own idiotic domestic reasons, decided to stop nuclear power and be reliant on Russia. You know what? I think you're idiots. You run your country the way you want, okay? I don't care. You decide. It's your territory. At the end of the day, you're 10 times closer to them than we are. You people decide. Why should we have to be more hawkish about Germany's borders than Germany itself? Why, if Brussels and the EU are telling us that we're freaking out and causing a panic on their continent, why don't we listen to them? I mean, since when has it that we have to make Europe in our own image? It's not 1945, okay?
Yeah.
I mean, we built them up specifically so that they could have determine their own destiny. If they decide in order to live with this situation with Russia, so be it. That is not our problem.
Yeah.
In order to say that. I'd also point to this. People are trying to draw comparisons with Asia. It's completely different. The South Koreans and the Japanese and the Singaporeans, the Vietnamese, and many of our allies in Asia are way more hawkish than we are in terms of against China. They are way more concerned about what's actually happening in there. And if anything, the U.S. is very much following the mood of the people in the region, whereas here we are trying to impose the institutional insanity of our think tank class upon the actual Europeans themselves.
Well, and
That's
keep
the
in
problem.
mind that the Ukrainians are pointing to some domestic political concerns that may be weighing into why we're seeing this play out right now. And, you know, I don't doubt, look, I'm not one to be like, oh, Russia's a good actor in this and they're great and Putin has none to play. Nobody's saying that. However, let's keep in mind that who's been most aggressive in pushing this stuff from the West point of view? The US and the UK. You have two world leaders there who are tremendously unpopular domestically and in big trouble right now. Yeah. Guess what is very effective sometimes in helping to revive or distract from other political problems, helping to create some sort of a foreign entanglement that is very, you know, very fraught and very stressful to keep the population focused on that. That's one thing. And then, of course, you also have the fact that right now we've withdrawn from Afghanistan, and I don't think it's any accident that now the military-industrial complex is like, where do we get our next buck from? What's the next arms deal? Where's the next place, you know, that we can get involved with that's going to make sure that we get the cash that we've been accustomed to over the coming years. So those are the sorts of factors that the Ukrainians are actually seeing pretty clearly based on that statement where they're saying, hey, listen, I mean, this is not a good situation, but you all are going way further than what we're actually seeing happening on the ground here. So I would listen to them way before I listen to whatever our news media is trying to spin us on.
Well said.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.